Linux command line got you down? Are you ready to bash your head in? Let's learn more about the bash command interpreter, the most popular command interpreter, I think, for Linux and open source and OS X. And my friend Grizzle is here to help us out.
Hey everybody.
Alright, the first thing we're going to do, this is our Fedora 23 workstation. We're going to open a terminal window in GNOME, and it's going to be the bash command interpreter. There are lots of other different command interpreters other than bash. There's TSCH and fish. Those are other popular command interpreters. I'm sure that there's a command interpreter war going on in the comments right now. People are ready to kill one another, but we're going to take a look at bash because that's the most common one, and it's handy, and you encounter it often. And so if you don't really know your way around any command interpreter, start with bash. And then once you get good at bash, you can look at some of the more advanced command interpreters. That's usually the logical level of progression. There are some cool commands you can do to move around the command line with Linux. They'll actually make you more efficient and better and more awesome. And we put this together because we really wish that somebody had showed us these cool tricks when we were first getting started, because we didn't learn this stuff for years. And it was like, oh my God, you can do that? And I don't have to do it the long way? It's like, no, you can just do this. It's like, oh, why didn't anybody tell me? And then they were like, well, it's in the man pages. You could have read the man pages. And it's like, yeah, but the man pages are made for somebody with like an IQ of 2,000, and it's just impossible. You can't really. So that's a conversation for another day. Let's take a look at bash. All right, so we've opened our command prompt window here, and I think we're in var www HTML. So we're outside of our home folder. Yeah. Okay, so we're running bash here as root, which is not a good practice. It's actually very bad. And we are already outside of our home folder with in this directory. So there's a command called Duras, D-I-R-S, and this lets you create a stack of directories. And so if you're not familiar with what a stack is, it's a computer science term, but it's literally, a Pez dispenser, as you said, or, I've got a stack of video cards. There's one video card on the stack, there's another video card on the stack, there's another video card on the stack, there's a graphics, or wait, no, that's a hard drive. Yeah, hard drive. So, like a Pez dispenser, oop, we popped one off the top. Oh, I popped a graphics card off the top. Oh, I'm going to push the hard drive to the top of the stack. Oh, I pushed the hard drive to the top of the stack. Now I'm going to pop the hard drive off the stack. Ta-da, a stack. Oh, I popped two graphics cards off the stack. We can do that with directories in Linux, because when you're working in Linux and you're working with the command line, you're very often working in very, very deep paths. So, like MySQL, if you're working with MySQL, that's varlib MySQL typically. Your web folder is, var www HTML. And then if you have, WordPress or some other content management system installed in there, it's going to have its own directories underneath there, ad nauseum. So we don't like typing. Typing is bad. Typing slows you down.
We should also mention that the Duras command, as you can see here, you can see I unaliased it because we actually have previously, quote unquote, fixed this. It shows you a horizontal layout and they're not indexed, and that's not super useful. So Duras/V is what you want to get the indexes and show them vertically, and it's much cleaner.
This will show you the stack of directories that are on the stack, I guess. And you can push things to the stack with push D. So you can do push D space dot, which will push the current directory onto the stack. Now the 0th item on the stack is always the current directory. So that's always changing depending on where you are on the file system. That's your current working directory.
And if you've come from a graphical only background, some of you are pretty young, you might have never experienced a command line before. The directory tree can get pretty deep, and retyping those over and over and over can get pretty awful. So push D is going to help us a lot in terms of not having to retype these paths over and over and over when we want to use them.
Now that we can see that our pushed directory path is at slot 1, it's going to be there until we pop it off the stack or do something with it. All right, and so one thing you can do if you're going to change directory, instead of doing CD, you can do push D, and that'll push the current directory to the stack and then change to the target directory. So if we do push D space /TMP, that'll change directory to /TMP while pushing our current directory to the stack. See, we're in /TMP now. And that's transient from the stack, meaning it's not really on the stack. If we use CD to go to another directory, it's not going to, it's not actually going to change it. You could alias CD to push D if you're a crazy person, but those are some other options that you have. But now if you run pop D, it will pop off the current thing off top of the stack, and it'll take us back to where we were because that's at slot 1. Isn't that handy? It's super handy. Now suppose you want to access these paths in a command. That's where it really gets handy. So you could do, let's say that we want to create an empty file in /tmp. Now we could do touch /tmp/t and hit tab for tab completion. You guys all know about tab completion, right? You can hit type the letter T and hit tab and it'll autocomplete. And that's, /tmp. It's like, well, okay, I mean, /tmp autocompletion. Let's say that we wanted to put a file at /var/www/html. That's 3 sets of tab completion. We don't want to do that. So instead we can do touch space and then squiggle 1, because squiggle 1 represents var www.html / whatever. And now we can do ls space squiggle 1, and squiggle 1 will be expanded. And so you could do echo space squiggle 1 to convince yourself that, this is the path that we expect.
This is super handy when you want to know what's in a directory, but you don't want to waste time actually going there.
This is way faster because you just type a couple of letters and then you're pretty much good to go. And you can also use it in other commands, like copy, for example. We could do cp squiggle 1 / empty space dot, and that'll copy the empty file from var www.html / empty to the current directory. And that was way faster even using tab completion. And then we can see that we copy the empty file from the var www.html path to the current directory with way less characters and typing, because typing is bad. You want to be as lazy as possible with the typing, and the shell stuff will do this. The general term for this, there's lots of different places where this happens, but the general term for this is shell expansion. Shell expansion, the shell is expanding these things into files and other things and passing those through to the commands. CP doesn't understand any of this. Echo doesn't understand any of this. Your shell is doing this for you. The most common type of shell expansion you might encounter is a wildcard. When you do, ls space star or ls space whatever, and you're using wildcards like star, the shell expands that star into a huge list for you. Well, it has other kinds of shell expansion, and this is the other kinds of shell expansion. Now, Duras by itself, I don't think is really that great. If we just run Duras, you get a list of files. These really should be numbered. The way that I work, I need these to be numbered because I don't really pop things off of the stack. I push tons of stuff to the stack, but I don't really ever pop things off from the stack the way that I work, because I'm usually working in like 10 directories at a time. And so for me, Duras-V, where I get the numerical list, is a lot more useful. So what we're going to do is alias Duras to Duras-V. The alias command is really handy because it lets you alias one command to another. So now when you run Duras, it'll automatically be replaced by Duras-V, and it'll give me the numbers, and it will mean that I have to type even less, which is great. So one other thing that's handy on the command line that you can use in conjunction with this is the history command and the subcommands around history. So if we type history, we can see a list of all the commands that have been run in quite a long time from this shell as this user. This is stored on a user-by-user basis, and so we've been running as root the whole time, shame on us. And this is a history of all of the stuff that we've run, trying to get this video together. So it's a lot of gibberish and a lot of gobbledygook. So this is cool, but how is this actionable? How does this save us work? Well, you can do exclamation point and then, a command. So we've got the clear command at 83, so we can do exclamation point 83, and it will run the clear command. This is really, really handy. You can also do exclamation point CL, and it'll run the most recent command that begins with those letters. And so again, it'll clear the screen.
Now that's a little dangerous to just blindly run a command that starts with CL, because you might have forgotten some horrible command that starts with CL. So you can also put :P at the end, and it's simply going to print instead of actually running that command, so that you know what it is before you actually run it.
History is amazing. Now supposing that you are not root and you want to run something as root and you forget to do sudo. I mean, how often does that happen? It's like, apt-get install something. It's like, no, you must sudo apt-get install something. Well, exclamation point is the last command that you ran. So if you do, something like echo hello world, and then we do sudo exclamation point, it's going to tell us what that command that it's going to run is, and then it's going to run it. So you don't have to retype the entire command. Exclamation point has a lot of other expansion options as well. You can use arguments from the previous command as well. So if we want to do, to demonstrate, if we're going to do echo space A, B, C for a command, the echo command takes, 3 arguments in this case. Then we might want to do echo space exclamation point :1 space exclamation point :3. This will let us reuse the first and third arguments from the previous command. So as you might have guessed, if you use a command number before the colon, then you can also specify the command from which to pull the argument. So if you do exclamation point 111 colon 1, for example, in our case, then that's just going to pull one of the arguments for that command. Now you don't have to retype arguments to commands. You can just pick and choose which arguments go where. And eventually your brain will start to map the arguments to commands, keep track of it, and you'll be able to type these really short commands that are actually extremely verbose. Now the exclamation point actually has a lot of other expansion options, including the first argument and the last argument. Sometimes you see this in the documentation as first word and last word, that kind of thing. That's really handy as well for being able to pick the first and last arguments only from your previous commands rather than using :1. You can use one fewer character to specify that. Now, like with everything on Linux, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And there is another way that you can get at the arguments for your commands, and that's with alt macros, basically. By default, it's alt. It's not necessarily alt. Sometimes it might be meta, and sometimes it might be left meta, depending on your particular computer setup. It's like real computers have a dedicated meta key or a Windows key. Sometimes you hear the meta key referred to as the Windows key, or the Windows key as the meta key when you're not using the Windows key on a Windows operating system, I guess. Or command on Apple. I don't know. It's a bunch of different names for the same thing. It's all deliberately confusing and annoying. It's bad.
So here we echo 3 arguments. So A, B, and C are our 3 arguments. So if we do Alt-1, then we're going to get argument 1. And then if we do Control-Alt-Y, we can paste that argument.
Control-Alt-Y. Y literally means yank to the clipboard.
Do the same
Why?
thing.
Because we said so.
You can do the same thing with argument 2 and get the B. And then Alt-0, same thing. Yank it, and you will get the actual command instead of arguments.
So depending on what you're doing, these kinds of things can save you a bunch of time as well. This varies from shell to shell as well, and the key bindings vary. So we've aliased and we've done a few other little things. The alias won't survive a logout. So the next thing we want to show you is how you can make this thing survive a logout. And you can begin your .bashrc. Now your .bashrc is one of your personal effects. As you do the journey into open source and as you get productive with open source, your .bashrc is something that will be with you for 10 to 20 years. Let's see, my bashrc I've had for about 12 years, give or take. And that's pretty typical. It's pretty standard for people that use this kind of system. And it's basically just a list of your preferences as it relates to the shell. It's not necessarily bashrc. When I said bashrc, I mean in sort of a generic sense, your personal configuration preferences for your command interpreter of choice. But the first modification, the first step on that road, if you don't already have a completely custom bashrc with custom command prompts and all that, is configuring your alias. And most distros have some example aliases in there that give you things like color directories and things like that. We're going to add an alias for Duras.
So we go to our home folder first to get to our personal bashrc file. Then we're going to use the Vim editor, which isn't installed.
Now VI is installed by default on just about everything. Really, there are 2 editors, and you're going to have to learn to use at least one of them, and it would be good if you were familiar enough with both of them to be productive, and that's Vim and Emacs. Now, VI is the predecessor of Vim, and on a lot of distributions, VI is just an alias for running Vim. Vim stands for VI Improved. You can actually use Vim almost like an integrated development environment if you're familiar with Visual Studio. Vim, with the right configuration, would give Visual Studio a run for its money as far as being an integrated development environment with multiple windows and all sorts of stuff like that. Vim is a nice program. Emacs is a larger, more complicated editor that does a lot more stuff and has a lot of features. It's a holy war between Vim versus Emacs. Use the tool that works for you. Use what works. But you should at least know VI and probably Vim, because Vim has some extra cool commands. And so now that we've got Vim installed, we're going to edit our bashrc. So what happens when you log in is that this thing basically just runs every time you log in. So if you want to have a bunch of commands to set up something, hell, if you want this thing to email you whenever somebody logs in as you can set that up as, in your bashrc file and be good to go. That's just a list of commands that run every time you log in.
I personally like my ls command to give me a little more information. So I'll go ahead and add that one as well.
And so now with a fresh terminal, we can see that our bashrc for root has run.
So our Duras is showing us the vertical indexed version and our ls.
Something went wrong with the alias for ls. It's like, okay, so we ran that and it didn't work. It turns out that our alias command runs before the, so that what this is doing, this if statement here is saying, if this file exists, if -f means file exists, basically, /etc/bashrc. So this is, we're going to do our personal stuff, and then we're going to run the system stuff. Don't know why Fedora's like this out of the box, but we're not going to do this. So in VI, we're going to go up, and we're going to do YY on this alias line to yank it. And then we're going to go down to the end, add a new line, and then paste it with P.
And then DD to delete the original.
And it'll work this time. Isn't that neat? That's why Duras didn't work and the other one did. These little things trip up noobs, and this is why everybody gets frustrated. It's like, oh, why did you do that? It doesn't make sense. And then you learn, and it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. That's why we left it. And bonus points for those of you out there that were like, oh, you're making a horrible mistake. Ta-da! So you'll notice that one thing that we'll probably want to add to our bashrc now is -- color after the ls and al, so that we can have color directories again. But that's a story for another day. Now that you've made it with us this far, something very special for you, VimTutor. So if you've never messed with VI before, I want to show you one other thing, and that's VimTutor. So you just type VimTutor and hit enter. This exercise should take you about 20 or 30 minutes to run through. We're not going to run through it, but this will teach you how to use the VI editor well enough that you can get by, and you should totally do that. If you're using Pico or Nano or something like that, you owe it to yourself to learn VI at least good enough to get through VimTutor. You really should, because not necessarily any system is going to have Pico or Nano or Gedit or whatever you might be using. You really should learn to use VI, and VimTutor does a pretty good job of teaching you in 20 or 30 minutes. And really, if you do it now, you're going to save yourself 20 or 30 minutes in the first couple of weeks of using VI anyway. Now we'll show you one other command, and that's TMUX. And I don't think it's installed on this system, so we'll probably have to install it. Oh, it is installed.
I totally installed it.
Awesome. Well, there you go. All right. So TMUX, look, we've got a green line down here at the bottom. TMUX is like screen on steroids. And if you don't know what screen is kind of like a multi-window dealy bob to do with terminals. And so instead of making multiple tabs and multiple windows, have you ever used Linux and noticed how the graphical terminal things, like even under GNOME, they're not really that great, especially when you have like multiple tabs and multiple terminal windows and that kind of thing. And some people have asked me, you know, in some of my other videos, I've done the like Gwake or the tilde drop-down menu, where when I hit tilde, well, when I hit meta tilde, the terminal window slides down, and it's like, hey, why don't you use one of the ones that has tabs or something? It's like, don't need it, got TMUX. TMUX lets you run multiple text windows really efficiently, side by side, or stacks of windows, or whatever you want to do, and you can remotely attach and detach to this. So whereas Windows has remote desktop and Macs have VNC, when you get really good at the command line on Linux, you don't really need a remote graphical environment for most things. You can just run your graphical stuff locally and then do everything else through SSH. And so with TMUX here, now that it's running, we're going to hit Control B and then %, which is going to create a new horizontal window. And then we can use Control B left and right to go back and forth between the windows. Isn't this amazing? We can also split things horizontally. So if we do Control B, quote, double quote, then we've got a split window that way as well. And so this is, you know, still manageable by GNOME. We can still have a normal windowing system. We don't necessarily have to resort to a window management program like i3, which you should look into. I'm trying not to throw around too much jargon here because it's kind of like drinking from the fire hose, and we don't want these videos to be like super really long. But TMUX is really handy for having multiple text windows, multiple terminal windows, even in just sort of one terminal. And especially if you're like me and you really like drop-down terminal, then this is a really handy way to go, especially if you've got a large high-resolution display.
Maybe the coolest thing about this, especially if you find yourself needing help with Linux a lot, and you have someone who's a great resource at that, is that this is essentially multi-user.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if somebody SSHs to your box and they can, you know, you can give them the user permissions, you can share your terminal window with them. They can attach to this TMUX session, and then both of you can see the same command line. And it's a really handy thing to do for troubleshooting and teaching and that sort of thing.
If you combo that with your history, then they can see where you failed and correct you.
You can even set up TMUX windows to just show the time, so you can do, Control B T. And now we have a clock because that's an efficient use of screen real estate, I guess. I don't know. We are crazy people, I guess. But this should be enough that you can Google and learn more and sort of go off on your own. It's like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. Because in the beginning, many, many years ago, I didn't know a lot of these things were a thing. I had to sort of discover them as I went along and discover them sort of socially with like social sharing. It's like, oh, how do you do this? And it's like, oh, I use history and exclamation point, whatever. And, all this stuff works really well. And it's like, oh, I use screen. It's like, oh, screen's old news. You should check out TMUX. And I was like, TMUX? What's that? So there are links to these commands and these things that we've shown you in the description. And there's a link to the TMUX cheat sheet that I find useful in the description. You can bring up the TMUX help by just hitting Control B ? And this will give you the help for TMUX. Now, the bind key literally means Control B. You can change that. It can be anything that you want, but you should probably leave it Control B by default before you go too crazy. So as you can see, TMUX has a lot of options with how you arrange windows and how you can manage windows and open and close them. And we actually have not created more than one window yet. These are just panes. When you do another window, then you'll have another full screen application and another full screen application and another full screen application if you want. And you can switch between those windows rather than having individual panes as we have here. I feel like we're probably at about our 20-minute limit. So until next time, I'm Wendell.
And I'm Grizzle.
And we'll see you on the forums.